Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of 2 Feet Deep. We want to thank Silverman Sound for producing all of the royalty-free music that you hear in today's episode. If you're interested in experiencing some royalty-free music for yourself, head on over to silvermansound.com. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Welcome to 2 Feet Deep, where we have fun with Christian concepts and theology through a variety of ways. I'm Eddie Brumley, and I'm here with my best buddy, Derek Markgraf. Derek, how you doing?
Howdy, howdy. Doing well on this wonderful rainy day. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, doing great, man. Yeah, lots of rain, doing fantastic. We have today a show that has a unified theme, which we don't always do. And I didn't do this one on purpose. It just seemed to fall together in that kind of way. So this one actually has a theme. Can you believe that?
Well, what's funny is I didn't pick up on it looking through your show notes, so I guess we'll see.
We'll see. Okay, well, we will see if I'm telling the truth. There is one piece. Okay, maybe it doesn't have a theme. It feels like it has a theme to me. All right, look at the show notes and going, okay, I might be over promising here. Well, we want to start with entertainment exegesis.
Entertainment exegesis.
Yeah. Take a deep dive into something in the entertainment world. Could be sports, music, movies, books, holidays, whatsoever. And today we're talking about the unfinished Beatles song. So, if you have been keeping up with the world of music, an unfinished Beatles song was just finished and released to the public. Have you had a chance to listen to it, Derek?
I have. I actually love it. I
Yeah.
think it is a great Beatles song. I think that it definitely, boy, when you get all four guys back in the room together, even though they couldn't be together at the same time because of deaths, uh, it still had a magical Beatles sound to it, in my
Yep.
opinion.
Yeah, mine too. And so what makes this interesting is that lots of musicians that have passed away have archives of music. In fact, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But this particular song, the technology just wasn't there to take the rough form of it and clean it up enough for basically being able to listen to it in the quality we're used to listening to songs. But thanks again to advanced computers and AI and that kind of thing, they were able to clean it up and remove some noise and some other things, be able to clean it up enough to add instrumentation back into it, and it is basically remastered. But that's not even the right word. It was never
Nope.
mastered to begin with. It
Mm-mm.
was a demo that they were then able to master because of computer technology.
Yeah, I
Which
don't even know if that's the correct way to say it. I mean, it was a John Lennon written song that
right?
he recorded by himself as kind of a show and tell type thing. Let me put this down so we don't forget it, so I can show the boys. Um, Paul fell in love with it from the get go. John was kind of on it and
Hmm.
scrapped it, kind of a thing. But Paul's love for it, as we got the technology, they came back in, were able to pull out some of the background noise of John's recording because of what we can do through technology today. And then uh, um, Paul and Ringo and George came back in over it through different times and were able
Yeah.
to play their instrumentation over it and then blend it all together and master it. And man, what a fascinating thing to be able to do now. And still, at its core, it's nothing but the Beatles.
Yep. And of course, Song is Now and Then, and it is a fantastic song. And again, in a way, this is not unusual. I remember in high school that posthumous song by Roy Orbison, You Got It, was released. But this was different than what Derek just described. because the song, "You Got It" by Roy Orbison, had already been mastered. It was basically already ready to go as a song. It just didn't get released. And after he passed, his estate and his family decided that it was a good song. The public deserved to hear it, and they were proud of the song, and so they released it. But it was already ready to go. It's not like this at all.
No, no, it was already in the bag, and as a matter of fact, Roy Orbison was part of a group of, a super group, if you will,
Oh,
Wilburys with
love the
yeah,
berries.
with George Harrison of the Beatles and, Tom Petty and a few other fellas that you would recognize their names possibly if you're involved in music at all, and the thing is, like, George Harrison's even uncredited on this song, but he played on it as well as the other Traveling Wilburys. And so it's kind of a Traveling Wilbury song, but it was a written and it's Roy Orbison's song, and I remember this song and loved it.
Yeah.
When it came out, I really enjoyed it. I thought that was fascinating. You know, I hadn't realized. I guess it was fascinating because I hadn't recognized that "You Got It" was done this way. I didn't realize. I guess I was so young at the time. I wasn't really concerned about whether Roy Orbison was dead or not. And in the age of MTV, no one was dead because it didn't matter if they were dead or not. There was a video showing them singing it, and of course, the video shows Roy Orbison singing it. So
And and so this brings me to the next piece. I'm going to preface it before I even talk about this next portion. There has always been within the Christian faith and within the Christian community a lot of different ways of thinking about how we relate to the wider world, especially when it comes to things like entertainment. For example, there are some Christians that will not listen to secular music or watch secular television or whatever. They just won't, and it's part of their conviction, part of their thinking. There are also, of course, Christians who are not selective at all about their viewing and watching, and maybe some of what they watch and view and listen to, other Christians might raise an eyebrow to. I'm somewhere in the middle, in that I appreciate pop culture. I recognize that not everything that is in pop culture conforms with my faith, and I recognize that and can think critically about it. But that said, am I think popular culture is a good thing, and that there's a lot of good within it. But I'm about to mention an artist where it's definitely a mixed bag, and that is the artist formerly known as Prince.
I
And
think he was
I watched.
formerly known, but then I think he became back to Prince again.
Wow, so he got to do wow, full circle.
But I could be wrong. I could be
Uh,
wrong. I don't.
oh, but
Yeah.
I watched a documentary on Prince, and Prince was a prolific songwriter and musician, and he wrote a song every day and recorded it. He had a recording studio and a producer that he had on his payroll constantly. So he just paid her to be his exclusive producer. He recorded a new song every day for 30 years.
Yeah, I watched the video too, and we're gonna link it. But we're gonna link it, and it's on YouTube. And man, here's the
Yep,
thing: I've always considered Prince a musical genius. The way he could put rhythms and sounds and instrumentation and vocals all
yep.
together, and the speed at which he did it was unbelievable. What I didn't understand is exactly how fast that speed was until I watched this video, and to understand the output that he was doing this daily. It was completely fascinating. One of the things that was fascinating is everybody's heard about the vault that Prince has. He's got music in the vault. And a lot of people use that terminology for some songs that they've got that are tucked away that nobody may ever hear. As a musician, I've written tons of songs. I've not written one a day, but I've written over 100 songs in my lifetime, which seems nothing comparable to Prince's one a day for 30 years. But that being said, I have what could be considered a vault of music that no one's ever going to hear because for whatever reason the songs weren't either to my appreciation, or I didn't feel like maybe they would reach people the way I intended them to, or maybe I just forgot about them, but what I realized from watching this video is that when they say Prince has a vault, he literally has a giant warehouse that is locked behind a vault door of nothing but recorded music no one has ever heard. That's mind boggling.
And if his estate were to ever decide to start releasing it, it would be
Yeah.
an enormous
It could
catalog of
there could
music.
be a song released daily, and in 30
I mean,
years, I'll be 95.
thousands.
You'll be just slightly older than that, and we could be dead and gone before you could release every one of Prince's songs if you released one a day. That's crazy.
And so the biblical idea that I really just thought about is I just thought about a couple of passages, one from
Mm,
Ecclesiastes where it talks about God hiding eternity in the human heart, but also the book of Hebrews talking about how long after we're gone, our life goes on speaking. And precisely the Hebrew says, though they're dead, yet do they still speak to us. And I was thinking about the impact of our lives and how the impact of our lives continue to have implications for others, even long after we're gone. And that can be for good, that can be for bad, but that our lives continue to cause some kind of rippling effect,
that is,
even after we're dead and gone.
it's funny as I was wondering because you didn't list the biblical tie in here on the show notes like we normally do, and I was wondering where we were going to tie this in at because it's fascinating entertainment wise.
Yeah.
But man, you just nailed it. That we're all essentially leaving a legacy, and what is that legacy going to say going forward to future generations?
But with that said, are you ready for what the what? Yeah,
Let's do
Derek
it,
actually
brother.
came up with this one, and it was really good. It fit the overall context. And if you want to know, it does.
We're
Our
back to
show
the
has a
theme.
theme, and that is, does it have a theme? I think it does. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. What happens to us after we die?
All right.
And what the what? We're talking about from Matthew 8. We're talking about hell. So we actually could call this one "What the hell."
What the hell? That's right. We just offended way over half of our listeners, lost half
That's
our
right.
audience.
That's right. And listen, truthfully, we're not trying to be profane here. We really are talking about the biblical teaching of the afterlife as it relates to those who inherit the kingdom and those who go off into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, and the difference between what the Bible says about heaven and hell versus what popular culture and imagination think those ideas mean. And
This is such a great discussion, and I know you and I've had it briefly. And I want to I want to preface how this came up because in the church we have a variety of opinions about hell, from the worst case scenario of what hell is, which is in my opinion, the eternal burning, um, the eternal thirst. Nothing is ever. You never die in this afterlife, but you are continually tormented. If I could get my tongue to work. To the opposite end of the church, where some people just don't even believe that hell even exists.
right,
And so this is what started the conversation with you
yep,
and I as we began to discuss, well, what does the Bible say about hell?
yep,
And I think that a lot of listeners are going to be maybe fascinated, I hope is the word, to understand one, maybe there's a lot less about hell in the Bible than they originally think. And two, is it the way that we actually perceive it to be, or has culture and historical cultures of the past influenced it in such a way that we have a improper understanding of what it is. And I'm asking that rhetorically, but also in the hopes that maybe the discussion will kind of clarify some of that.
Yep. And so, where I think is important to start, oddly, is with heaven, and to as a segue of showing that much of our thinking about the afterlife does not come from Christianity or Judaism, but from the larger culture and from historical uh, backgrounds that we're not always aware of. So, for instance, my favorite New Testament scholar, N.T. Wright, does a podcast, and when he on one episode he's talking about heaven, and he says, if you are looking for somebody in the past that teaches that we are really a spirit trapped in a physical body, in a physical world where we don't really belong, and that one day we'll be redeemed and this spirit will be set free to go live in its true home in a non-physical reality called heaven. He said, man, do I have the author for you. His name's Plutarch, and he was a Middle Platonist and a priest in the temple of Aristarchus, and he lived just before the time of Christ. But unfortunately, Plutarch is what a lot of people think that the gospel teaches, and think that that's actually Christianity, and have built an idea of the afterlife and heaven based on Middle Platonism, not on Judaism or what the New Testament teaches. And if you find that shocking, hell is even more so built. Uh, uh, so the New Testament clearly teaches, nobody in the New Testament is more explicit about the consequences of living in conformity to God's grace, or in resistance to God's grace. No one speaks with more clarity than Jesus. And in Matthew chapter 8, um, Jesus speaks very clearly about what happens if we reject God's grace, if we refuse to submit ourselves to and receive and to live uh, with the life, the promise of eternal life that God gives us. Unfortunately, most Christians and even many non-Christian people who still sort of subscribe to Christianity as sort of their default religion think that what is being talked about here is a cave with boiling pots and devils with pitchforks and horns on their heads, and they go around torturing in unusual ways the people that are unfortunate enough to end up there. One of my favorite Simpsons episode, there Homer goes to hell, and the demon assigned to torturing him tries to feed him donuts till he pops, and is unable to come up with enough donuts to make that happen. The problem with this picture is that it doesn't come from the New Testament. It comes from European paganism, and it has more in common to do with the religions that dominated Europe prior to Christianity than when Christianity arrives on the scene.
Mhm.
Now, to make matters worse, during the plagues of the of the early Middle Ages, in which countless people died, Jews and Christians became morbidly fascinated with death, and you can understand. You know, you half your village dies of the plague. You're thinking about death quite a lot, and they start writing elaborate text both on heaven and hell, and they go way beyond anything that the scriptures actually say about either subject. But those writings, which draw from imagery from paganism, end up coming to be sort of the default way that even very biblically literate Christians are thinking about the afterlife. And so what I think is important to do is go back to these texts and to ask ourselves, what do they actually say? All right, I'm gonna stop there because I've said quite a lot, and I haven't given you a chance to jump in anywhere. Jump in there somewhere.
Well, yeah, I'm not someone who has researched tons about hell, but I have researched enough to know that many of the places that hell is referenced in the Bible were actually literal places during the time outside the village where eternal fires were kept burning for f- for waste and maybe in some cases sacrifices. And so that was a very literal picture that people began to paint. But I also know that there is a deep influence of Dante's. What's the famous poem that I'm trying to reference? You can jump in and tell me. I'm
The Infernal, Dante's Infernal,
Yeah,
Dante's
Dante's
Par.
Inferno. That's what it is. And I
Yeah,
know that has had a massive impact on people's interpretation of hell as well, which is just a great fantasy story slash poem, and has absolutely nothing to do with biblical texts at all. Uh, but I'll be in complete honesty. I believe in hell, and I believe that what hell is at its core is eternal separation from God. I don't have a full understanding of what that means or is like, which is, I believe, how the conversation, one of the ways the conversation started with you and I, is probably me asking you, what was your understanding of hell based on the biblical texts? Um, so, as the expert of the subject, I'm going to let you continue to tell us.
yeah,
Because again, like I said, it's not a subject that I've studied in depth, other than to know that there is hell, it is real, and it is eternal separation from God. But what does
yeah.
that mean?
So you're right. The fields of Hagiana uh, were the, as you said, the smoldering, burning dump outside of Jerusalem. And as nasty as it is to think about, prior to really even the 20th century, probably even prior to the 21st century, most big cities had to have something like it. Just nasty. But in some parts of the world, that's still the only way that they can get rid of waste, including human waste and other things. Is
Hmm.
just have a nasty burning pit. Our One of our nephews spent time in Afghanistan, and they had the army. Our army had burning pits because there wasn't anything else to do with human waste and other things. And so Jesus says that there will be those who absolutely refuse to live in the presence of God's grace, um, who will then be on the outside with all their smoldering yuckiness, all their smoldering trash, all their smoldering waste, as you might have it. Now, obviously, he's using a picture from something that, so he doesn't literally mean that we're going to spend eternity outside of 500 yards outside of Jerusalem in that particular burning field. But I do think the picture tells us something about being on the outside when we should and could be on the inside. Something about choosing to be in the presence of all our yucky. So Jesus is saying something about a deliberate choice to be outside of the presence of God, outside of the city of God, to be to choose to be rather with our smoldering nastiness, nickiness, and rather than coming into God's purifying grace and whatever else that means. To think about spending eternity not fully healed, not fully redeemed, not fully set free from all of my own brokenness when I could be. To remain at arm's length from God when God's standing there with open arms it should be a frightening, sad picture of what it'll be to be in eternity. Um, you know, part of what heaven and hell are, and I don't want to make it sound too simplistic, nor do I want to make it sound like some kind of thing we create ourselves. But there is a sense in which heaven or hell starts now, right? Jesus offers us abundant life now, and it begins now. But but the condition of the soul that can decide to go and be resistant to God, to hold on to sin, to hold on to brokenness when God could heal and redeem us, that also can begin now. And what is it to say an eternal no to God, so that in eternity we're still living with all of that mess and brokenness, rather than allowing God to fully embrace us and fully heal us? And I think that's absolutely far more terrifying than a Turkish prison where somebody with horns on their heads poking me with a pitchfork as I sit in boiling oil.
Yeah, I think in order, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in order for that type of hell to be terrible, don't you have to have some sort of acknowledgement of sin and and the horrific nature of it? Like for those who waller in their own sin, and the Bible refers to them as the fools, who don't acknowledge that even that their sin is sin, that they're happy within it, and they continue on to live that way.
Yep.
I guess the question is do you see where I'm going? Will that type of hell?
C.S. Lewis has an allegorical interpretation of this called the Great Divorce. It's a very small story, but it paints a picture of what it is like for a group of people to choose to live eternally apart from God and within their sin. And the only thing I'll say is some of them end up becoming quite pitiful, subhuman like beings in eternity, and you would pity them more than anything because they're just less than what they could be. But we'll reference that. That'll be a good place for people to check out if they want to explore this thought further.
Yeah, I think ultimately
Yep.
it's a place where there is no
Yep. And,
gratification or
yep.
happiness.
I do.
That's true. You know what I mean? But I think sometimes we want it to be something different based on our
Yep.
physical experience rather than our spiritual one. Like, like we want the murderer and the rapists to suffer in an eternal hell that looks like fire and brimstone because we feel like
Right.
that's the
But
ultimate
it's
that's
got
the
to be
only
on
fair
our
thing.
terms, right? And you
Right.
know, because
Exactly. Everything
what
does.
whatever else is happening in heaven or hell, God's justice and His love are always commingled, right? So that even those of us that have our sins forgiven and go to heaven must still give an account for our lives and stand before God and give an account, right? There will still be justice, even for those who receive grace. And likewise, for those who live under the judgment of God, even in that state, there's some bit of mercy, and God's nature isn't going to change, or His character is not going to change. His both His justice and His love are always going to be perfectly consistent with each other.
So let me ask you one question because I can feel you trying to get off the subject and going on, and
Yes.
I'm not letting you. Because there are people in this world that have quote unquote died and come back from the dead and have experienced hell. Like one of the most famous ones is the 23 minutes in hell. And in those references, uh, they say that they've experienced that terrible torment that we often picture in this world as more pop culture Dante Inferno's hell versus the hell that you and I are describing.
Hmm.
How do we reconciliate those two ideas? Is there any truth to the author? Or is something more like an Exodus where God says, no one will ever see me and live? Do we feel like that's an experience that will actually never be experienced outside of this realm until you're in one of those places or the other? Again, not 2 feet deep, but just curious of your opinion.
All right. So my opinion is when an experience is so widespread throughout human culture as to all right, there are some experiences that are widely reported. Experiences of near death and going into something like some kind of a paradise, or conversely, take going into something like hell. I, I think it'd be arrogant for me to dismiss all of those, or even to dismiss ones that don't fit what I'm saying, because I don't know what that person's experience. I think an open-minded person would have to say, listen, um, I have no way to be able to fully evaluate somebody who becomes clinically dead on the table and then comes back to life 23 minutes later. I have no way to evaluate that. But I have to allow the data to stand. What I would say is the description that I'm trying to give of hell, if my understanding is correct. I'm not trying to make it sound like it's, well, listen, God's just sort of going to soft pedal uh, his justice, and that it's not really going to be all that bad. Uh, I was just with one of my dear friends who almost died 6 times from drug overdose. He is now a Christian evangelist who goes all over the country talking to people who are trapped in addiction. He goes to prisons, homeless shelters, and whatever. And he'll tell you that at one point, he was chasing after a happiness that he thought these drugs could give him. Well, they were absolutely destroying him. And he'll tell you that if God had just let him go, what he would have ended up being and becoming and would have been horrible. I mean, and he was in an awful place. Even if he couldn't see how awful it was, I mean, he's eating out of dumpsters. He weighs 90 pounds soaking wet because the drugs are destroying him from the inside. But yet he's so blind to it all that, in some kind of morbid way, at that point he still thinks he's happy. It's
Mm,
only it's only way after he's out of it that he's like, I wasn't happy at all. I was in hell. I was
mm,
I was I was in a horrible place. And part of the blindness of it was to be literally in a dump and think that that is somehow happiness.
right. Yeah. It's a great, fascinating subject. Again, I mean, like, I think we're both on the same page. It's a very real destination for those who don't choose Christ. But what exactly it is, you know, we may never know, other than it is a separation from Christ, and it's a place of, I think, a good description of chasing happiness, but never finding it,
Yep. Yep. All right.
which is eternal sorrow.
All right. Are you ready for his name news game?
The His Name News Game. When we started this segment, it was always one of my favorites, and the more we've done it, the more I can't stand being on this side of it.
I
It's
love
not
that.
easy. It's not
Mhm.
easy.
Goofy, weird news stories. And how will Derek relate this to the scripture? I told you there is a theme, and there really is, about what happens to us after we die.
Oh,
Except
great.
now we're not talking about what happens to us particularly after we die, but what happens to certain kinds of plants after they die. This one happened. Oh, hold on, buddy. Yeah, I hadn't even gotten started. This is NPR. This happened in November 24th of 2023, so just a few weeks ago. A 6-foot tumbleweed blocks traffic in small Northern California town.
Oh my gosh.
A 6-foot tumbleweed.
All right, get on with it.
so, so they had been having some severe windstorms, and this small California town, a 6-foot tumbleweed, weighing quite a lot because it took some time to get it out of the road. Blocked traffic for a few hours.
A few hours. I
Yeah,
mean, I'm
so
just
what
thinking, okay, that's a massive tumbleweed.
that is a
That's
massive.
taller than you or me. I don't think either one of us are 6 feet, you know.
No,
And I'm thinking, how did it get there? So there must have been some pretty significant wind or whatever to get it to that place. And then it sits there for 6 hours blocking traffic. I mean, it must have been a 2 lane road, I assume.
yeah, I mean, I guess but they yeah, it sits there for a pretty significant amount of time. They have to get it out of the road, and story just goes on to say there's a bunch of different plants that can become tumbleweeds. There's not just like one kind. The plants become dried and tangled and whatever. And wind sort of just gets them all bundled, and usually they're pretty small, but they sometimes get really big. That's it.
Yeah, tumbleweed's always been an interesting thing to me. You see it in cartoons, and for those of you that don't live where tumbleweed exists, which we really don't either, in all
We don't.
reality, um, my, it's a fascinating thing. You almost wonder, is that real or is that just a cartoon thing? Um, but on the other side of that is, it's a reality. My dad grew up in Texas, and so he could speak, very clearly on tumbleweed because it was something he witnessed. And I guess my biblical tie-in would be Matthew 13:30 and 32, where it says, "Let the weeds and the wheat grow together until the harvest time. At the harvest time, I will tell the workers this: first, gather the weeds and tie them together to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." Then Jesus told the people another story. God's kingdom is like a mustard seed, and it goes on to tell the mustard seed and the branches. And my tie-in here is going to be, what is tumbleweed worth? I mean, like, I would imagine that if it's something that is gathered up, I have no experience of tumbleweed, that it's probably not better for anything much better than starting fires with. And I can't really relate anything to traffic other than the weeds in your life, the sin in your life, the struggle in your life, the addictions in your life prevent you from going to where you want to be. And I
Ooh,
think
good.
that that's a very true reality. Just as we were talking about hell being the experience of not being able to get that happiness that you're seeking, that's what the weeds in our life are. The stuff that we need to burn and and throw away are preventing us from going to where we want to be.
Ooh, that's good, dude. Bravo. Wow. Not only does that do really a lot of justice to the thing we just talked about, but it's a really good tie in it. Everything we've said so far.
Yeah, yeah. Like, yeah, there's becoming a theme. I I said we'll see at the beginning of this, and there really is a theme to the show. You're better than you thought you were, Eddie.
Well, I can't promise that when we come back for season two, I can't promise that there ever be another one again. I mean, it was funny. I didn't start with a theme. This one just sort of found a theme on its own by accident.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes that's the way it goes. For sure, for sure. So people, get the weeds out of your life. Throw them away, burn them, like Matthew says, so that you can get to the place of true happiness and gratification, which I'm going to tell you can only be found in Christ.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to eschatological AI.
Eschatological AI. Dum, 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 dum.
We'll see how tight this show stays with this one. This one is still on that theme. What happens to us after we die? This one could end up taking some weird twists and turns, but the segment from on tech and our future, Peter Cushing in Rogue One. And if you can't quite think of who Peter Cushing is, well, you're still only going to be able to think of this if you're a Star Wars fan. But in the original Star Wars movie, Peter Cushing is the commander over the Death Star, and he
Grand Moff Tarkin.
That's right. And he doesn't play a huge role, but he plays a real iconic role. And in Rogue One, as they're visiting this theme, they want that character in the movie, but Peter Cushing's been dead a long time. So they secure the rights from the family and recreate him digitally for Rogue One. So Peter Cushing gets to be in a movie long after he's dead. And this is kind of like the songs being re-released, but I think this is even different than that in that movie studios are starting to experiment with using famous iconic actors. People have great voices or great presence, or their person themselves has deep cultural significance, and they're starting to put these people in movies and television shows and commercials long after they're gone.
Yeah. And the flip side of that is the Indiana Jones movie that just came out with Harrison Ford. Dial of Destiny, I think is what it's called. Is that correct? Have you seen it yet?
Yep, but that sounds right.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet either, and I actually really do love Indiana Jones movies. Some more than others, but that's normal. And in this case, with Harrison Ford's character, because of the time that the Indiana Jones movies take place, I think they start like back in the 30s, and then they progress. So this one, it's certainly I don't think any later than the 60s. But again, I have not seen the movie, so I don't know 100%. But the problem is Harrison Ford's in his 80s, but nobody is Indiana Jones but Harrison Ford. So what he is able to do is play the part, and then they go back and de-age him to make him look like a version of his younger self. And so, in the same vein as resurrecting from the dead, you're resurrecting your youth that can no longer exist either. Other though some people have said that it does, his movements still kind of reflect an 80-year-old man, as opposed to what he would have looked like in his 30s, which I think is interesting. But again, I've never seen the movie to know that for sure. However, the whole concept of this putting people in movies that have been passed, we treat it as though it's something new, but is it really new, Eddie?
Probably not, because I can think about a B movie, the most famous B movie of all time, Planet Nine from Outer Space. Bela Lugosi.
I have no idea what this movie is, but it definitely sounds like a B movie.
Oh, it is so bad, it's great, but it is an absolutely terrible movie. A completely at the time completely unknown film director named Ed Wood is able to convince Bela Lugosi. Now, Bela Lugosi is way past his prime. He's the original Dracula. If you're saying, okay, who's Bela Lugosi? He's the original Dracula. At this point, he's in his 80s. He's a chronic alcoholic, completely broke, and Ed Wood talks him into being in his movie. And he goes over and does a little bit of film, just filming Bela Lugosi, and he wants Bela Lugosi to play like a space alien, but Bela Lugosi keeps playing a Dracula character which doesn't fit in the movie at all. Ed Wood gets about 3 minutes worth of Bela Lugosi acting like Dracula, signs a contract with him to be the star. He's the only star that Ed Wood is going to have for this movie. Bela Lugosi then dies,
Uh-oh.
but Ed Wood still needs a famous person. He needs a real actor in his movie because everybody else is a volunteer. So he puts Bela Lugosi in the headline part of the film, but he's only got 3 minutes of real of this guy acting like Dracula, and the movie's about space aliens.
Oh me, that's funny.
And
That
he
is
somehow
funny.
made to put all 3 minutes of that reel into that film, even though it makes no sense
Right.
whatsoever.
Well, speaking of that, I can remember commercials with Bruce Lee in them long after Bruce Lee had died, but they're
Yes.
brought back, but in an intentionally silly way a lot of the times, advertising whatever it was. I can remember that happening. I can remember in the '90s, probably the most famous instance of my era was actually Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee, in the movie The Crow. I don't know if you remember, a great movie. Not that I'm recommending that people watch it, but anyway, that's irrelevant. Great movie if you like a good revenge story. But in one of those scenes, a prop gun was actually loaded with a real bullet, kind of the Alec Baldwin case of what was that, a year or two ago that happened in the movie. But anyway, the Brandon Lee got shot and it killed him. But in order to finish the movie, they had to digitally resurrect him to complete the movie. And so part of that movie, when you're watching Brandon Lee act as the Crow, he's dead.
Yep.
And they used CGI and voiceovers to do that. And I remember that being pretty fascinating. Uh, Still a little bit different than the complete resurrection of Peter, um, Star Wars guy,
Cushing, Peter
Cushing.
Cushing.
Yeah, Peter Cushing. A little bit different because Peter Cushing, for his role in Rogue One, wasn't ever there in that costume, in that makeup, in that garb, in that voice. But he was absolutely necessary because of the time period in which Rogue One took place within the rest of the story of Star Wars. So he had to be there. It would have been weird if he would have not been there to be, and it had been such a integral part of the other stories. And I think there's even maybe it's Audrey Hepburn in a chocolate commercial that they brought her back. I think so. This idea has been around a while, I guess, is what I'm getting at. It's not really a new idea. Maybe we're just getting better at what we're able to do with it. But AI is, it's getting to a place where it can create. Like I just watched this video. It was one of those. Here, I'll ruin it for you. And somebody had taken a Dr. Dre rap. It's good to be a gangsta, and had Hank Williams singing it in Hank Williams' voice over Hank Williams' tune, but it was Hank Williams' tune of "It's good to be a gangsta," and it was hilarious, uh, but a pretty good rendition of it, and it's kind of crazy to think how AI can mimic and resurrect. And I've been blabbering on here for a hot minute, so I'm going to let you answer this question. Is that not concerning to think about how accurately it can mimic voices? You can resurrect people. We've seen deep fakes, which is a big thing now of people never doing anything close to what you can present that they've done and said.
Yeah, so so obviously there's mostly, for most of the section we've talked about, really just fun things. I mean, like, look, it'd be fun to go see Michael Jackson in concert as a hologram, right? And still get to sort of have that experience. I mean, that'd be neat. It'd be
Yeah.
neat, see Frank Sinatra, or
Gosh, yeah.
yeah.
Give me
So
one chance to go see the Rat Pack. I'm there.
yeah, right. I mean, so there's some fun things about this, and I think that's almost always what we end up saying about the in this technology section. But we end up saying, look, there's a lot of really good uses, but the deep fakes. So we're getting ready to come into election cycle 2024. I didn't know this until recently, but this is going to be across the world the most officials elected ever at one time. So we're going to have a lot of world change through the election cycle in 2024. I'm really afraid of the part video is going to play in this because there's going to be a lot that's going to surface on. on things like YouTube, maybe even on mainstream media, that it's not going to be easy to decide whether or not you can believe your eyes. You may see Nikki Haley or Donald Trump or Joe Biden doing or saying things that maybe they didn't do or say, and but the presentation of it is going to be so convincing that it's going to seem like they did. And I'm not sure how we have election cycles from this point going forward when you can't even believe what your eyes are telling you.
What your eyes are telling you, what your ears are telling you. You know, it's interesting that we're talking about this because I was thinking in the political scope when I asked the question how scary this is. On one side, I do think it's terrifying. On the other side, we've been dealing with it for years. The only difference is rather than completely fabricating something, we fabricate it by taking whatever has been said out of context, and we only show a clip or we only give you one quote. For example, and a much lesser concerning thing than the political scope is there was a young boy at a Kansas City Chiefs fan or at a Kansas City Chiefs game who had dressed up in Indian garb and had painted half of his face black and half of it was red. And the media person who presented it didn't get the Indian garb, only took a picture of the half of the face of the boy that was that was painted black, and then there was this accusation of blackface.
Right.
And then as a fuller picture came out, there was an accusation of cultural appropriation because of the whole Indian garb and everything. Turns out the boy has Indian heritage, and his grandfather is the chief of an Indian place and of some Indian tribe. And of course, none of it was either cultural appropriation, which don't even get me started on that, uh, and it certainly wasn't blackface by any means. And the way it was presented was you couldn't believe your eyes. You could, unless you did the research to figure it out, to find it out.
Yep.
What's crazy is even before that, not all of us had access to uh, a newspaper that might have been printed somewhere about a president where a quote would have been given to even go research it. So, on some level, we've been dealing with this
Of
throughout
course.
the political scope of our country forever. But this does feel like it's a different kind of level because it's going to look, feel, and sound real.
Yep.
And then what's gonna refute it? Where's the evidence going to be that you could refute it? Like in this case, there were more pictures taken, there were articles done. You could easily research it and figure out that the original presentation of this young boy was taken way out of context and absolutely absurd.
Yep.
Where's that context going to be when something is just totally fabricated, but it looks entirely real?
And say you've watched a video, and I'm not picking a political side here. You can be whatever you want to be. Just candidate X. Somebody puts out a fake video of that person saying some just egregious things, and for 13, 14 hours, news media is buzzing like crazy. This person's racist. This person's anti-Semitic. This person's whatever it is, and this person hates puppy dogs. Now, say 6 hours later, a correction comes out, says that video wasn't real, but you've already seen it. You can't unsee some things, right? So you've now been told that it was fake, but for 6 hours you thought it was real. You were outraged, and you thought, man, this candidate X hates puppies. How could I ever have a president that hates puppies? But it's retracted 6 hours later. But you still have that image in your mind. You
Hmm.
cannot say that that image won't influence you after that point, because it most certainly will at some level.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's
Yep. So
yeah,
I don't know.
that's how that's yeah. Boy, you don't even know how to even sometimes have a conversation about it because that's crazy. What do you think? What do you think biblically?
Boy.
The biblical worldview on all of this. I
I
mean,
think about how Satan disguises himself as an angel of light,
yep.
and Jesus says, talking about the last age. He says, there will be many who will come and prophesy, do miracles in my name, and yet by the fruit you'll know them. But he also says there's going to be a great falling away, and there's going to be a deception that's so great that even the elect are in danger. And I think probably more than ever we've just got to really really ground ourselves as much as we can in truth, and just realize that there are powerful forces at work in the world to deceive us, and man, we've got to be on guard. We've got to know.
I think that what we're seeing through the progress of technology, both in the digital world, but in the physical world too, uh, you're seeing how events of the Bible could unfold,
Yep.
and it makes you have to be more aware.
Yep.
I had somebody ask me once when COVID was first coming if I thought this was uh, the the coming of the Antichrist, and I and of course at this particular time during COVID, there was concern about getting out in public, going and buying and selling and things of that because of the amount of deaths that were happening. I mean, we're talking when it was first coming worldwide. And I said, I don't think this necessarily is, but I said, I think these are means of ways that could be used in the future to make that a reality,
That's right.
you know. And I think this AI stuff will play a part in that too.
I do.
When? I mean, it could be 100,000 years from now. I don't have
I
any
don't either.
idea. It could be tomorrow. But I do think that we're seeing how things could become potentially easier to deceive an entire world.
In the meantime, Las Vegas just announced Hank Williams, Michael Jackson, Tupac, the Rat Pack, and Shirley Temple in concert together for the first time ever.
Are you kidding me?
Yes.
Yeah. I was like, wait, somebody's doing it? That's crazy. Oh, that's hilarious,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
That's so funny.
All right, brother. Well, listen, you're heading out on a youth trip, and man, have a great time. And man, I think it's been a good show. And thanks for listening in.
Yeah. And feel free to chime in the discussion, the comments. Tell us your thoughts on all these things. We'd love to hear from y'all. And until then, we'll see you next
Next
season
season.
for season 2 of 2 Feet Deep. We'll see you, Eddie. Once again, we want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today on 2 Feet Deep. If you would like to reach out with any questions or thoughts, please email us at 2feetdeeppodcast@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll see you next time. Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of 2 Feet Deep. We want to thank Silverman Sound for producing all of the royalty-free music that you hear in today's episode. If you're interested in experiencing some royalty-free music for yourself, head on over to silvermansound.com. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.